Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Christina Hoff Sommers.
And wait, I'm Danielle Crittenden. And God, you walk into this studio. You've been away for months. And you just take over.
I've taken over. It's like I never left. I'm back.
Just for this one episode. I've been getting such flack for you leaving, and everybody thinks that I actually canceled you.
That would never happen.
Well, tell them what happened. Tell them where you've been. And if there were all these conspiracy theories about you.
Really?
I think some thought you were afraid of the vaccine and had gone into hiding, possibly captured by a cult.
Oh, no, none of that. I was just at home with my little terrier. Where is she? Terrier poodle.
Oh, this is great. We're recording in my house, in my snazzy homemade Femsplainer studio. And I just had Izzy on my lap. And now my grand dog Ringo is wandering around looking for Izzy. So there may be canine interruptions. Just heads up.
That's my, so this is new. You'll notice I have no alcohol.
You notice that Christina's not talking into the microphone.
I have no alcohol. I'm trying not to drink, and I'm on day 9.
This is so impressive. Do you remember last year when I went through Sober October? It was so hard. I ended up doing Sober November, Sober December. I
didn't support you.
No, you did.
Did I? I think I was sort of discouraging you, and
Well, no, there's no question. You get way less boring when you drink, when you don't drink. But no, this is great. You're sleepy. I think the main thing is, and this is going to make me sound really old, is I sleep so much better when I don't drink.
I just got a little worried. I stipulate I have 2 glasses of wine most nights, and apparently that's too much, although I don't believe the people. I shopped around for a doctor who said it was fine. But all my friends, including you and Megan, were having these sober months. And then I thought, well, I should be able to do that. And so I'm doing it.
Okay, well, we'll see how long.
With the exception of last Saturday night. They had champagne and paella. And I thought, what's the point? So.
Well, we'll see if you can even last through the show, honestly. Today we're going to, this is so great. This is such a great topic for you, is we're going to be talking about the suffragists and how they should be canceled because they're racist.
Oh,
and
already my blood pressure's going.
The center of this is the sculpture that's gone up in Central Park by artist Meredith Bergmann, portraying, well, there's a whole story to who it's portraying, but it now portrays Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Sojourner Truth. But there was Sojourner Truth got added. There's a whole long story about just the politics of getting that sculpture built. But before we get to that, Christina, I know when you come in here, you're always angry about something. and you maybe you've been chilled, being off the show and being in sort of isolated.
The key to not drinking is just not spending too much time on Twitter, because you are bound to find something that just enrages you. And so everything around this statue, and even the statue of Mary Wollstonecraft. Now that bothered me for another reason.
Okay, can you describe this? This came up, I think like 2 years ago it was made, but it's in England. Anyway, it looks like what Mary Wollstonecraft if she were a nude Vegas girl atop a wave, a surge
it's a little
poo.
Well, there's a swirl of silvery bronze, kind of phallic looking, really unpleasant.
Yes, it is phallic. It could be an ejaculation.
It could be, and then at the tip, we find a little homunculus creature, a female, anatomically correct, with a maybe doesn't she look a little maybe? There is so much
foliage.
It's ludicrous. It's not proportional. The arms are too short. The head's too big. It's an ugly little angry face. Mary Wollstonecraft was an elegant, beautiful woman. And the artist she does say, this is not a statue of Mary Wollstonecraft. It's a tribute to her ideas.
Yes.
That means. But I don't even think it succeeds at that level. Now, I will stipulate...
Well, it depends what her ideas were. Maybe in a modern day, she would write for Pornhub or something.
It's offended everybody. So radical feminists, certain category of puritanical feminists doesn't like it because of the unclad I can't even say sexy, but she has sexy boobs. That's about it. On top of the statue. They don't like that. They keep covering her up. And then I think just art critics don't like it because it's
really
and it's ludicrous.
It's sort of in the hood ornament school of hood ornament erotica school of sculpture. Well, the one in Central Park is more more traditional. But before we get to that, Christina, that wasn't the only thing that angered you, because when you came in, you were muttering something about pronouns. Or
this didn't really make me mad. This confused me.
Okay.
Yesterday, someone posted this. Again, I made the mistake of going on Twitter. This is Georgia State University, and they have a program called Women Lead, Paving the Way for Women to Lead. Okay, fine. And apparently, you can fill out this form and be part of it, and they ask you your name and your address and all that, and then your pronoun. And it can be, this is dismaying.
Okay, hang on. Ask me, quiz me. So what is the list do I get to choose from?
You can be a an en, an eor.
Hang on. En like French? En route?
Quand, a, he and she, of course, they. We got that.
That's like down the ladder is he or she.
Here, her, here, shoot. Yo, it's...
Hang on, hirsute, you mean covered in fur?
I think I made that one up, but there is a HIR.
I am, well, not really hirsute, I shave. Not that feminist.
Z, vis, ver, verself, zerself, yoself, herself, M-self, N-self. And then, to be inclusive, they say, if other, please enter here. Now... This is so.
Okay, we are not woke enough to like. I feel like I'm. It's impressive that I'm even hip to the they pronoun thing, but I don't where did the Z's come from? Like, do you have any idea what these mean?
I tried to find out. There's an encyclopedia of
co-self.
Some of them come from literature where people were trying to imagine a utopian world where
M-self.
Everyone can identify his or her or zer's own gender, and
zerself.
These have been suggested, and apparently people use them. Here's the problem. First of all, as a teacher, you don't really use people's pronouns. You use their names maybe, although I was afraid to use names because I couldn't remember them.
You in the back.
And then it's so invasive. I mean, most social movements want to, they're urging people to just treat them like everyone else and leave me alone. This comes with a whole instruction book for the whole population, and you can't follow the instructions because they are constantly changing and multiplying what's proper usage and how you can go wrong. It's mystifying.
Well, I like it. It almost sounds like it's sort of like a Borat guide, Yeah. It's like yourself, verself, herself. All right. Yeah. This is maybe for foreign students as well. How do you identify as verself? All right.
The obsession with, it's basically an all-out effort, a passion to get rid of normative sexuality. Now I can understand wanting tolerance. And believe me, if I met someone that wanted to be called whatever, I like to be nice. And if it meant a lot to them,
whatever,
I would whatever. But this is a relentless effort to get rid of the gender system. The problem is the majority of men and women are comfortable in it. So what do you do with that? Well, they're determined to tear it down. And so I think they don't want any language that marks he and she, her and him. And what's she doing?
Izzy's scratching my arm right now. I got a little distracted. All right. Well, then can we talk about suffragettes as females?
Well, you're not supposed to say suffragette unless you're British.
Suffragette.
In America, it was a term of derision.
Really?
Yes, it was. Well, it was a term. The British sort of claimed it and went with it. But in the United States, we call them suffragists, ISTS.
I never knew that. Suffragette does sound a little bit like rockette.
Rockette.
Like you can see a line of them in their pantaloons kicking their legs up high. My
husband used to call me a philosopher-ette.
So suffragists.
The suffragists. I'm going to be
suffragists. Suffragettes. I call them the suffragists with a Z because it's more inclusive.
Or suffragists, X-I-S-T-S.
Yes, X, suffrage X.
Or how about just the suffragists?
That's us.
That's us.
You have to suffer with us. Okay, so let's talk about this monument, this statue. Meredith, who will be on in a moment, is going to tell us about, as I said, the painful birth of this statue.
My God. And by the way, it's not just the statue. It's any effort. We are still in 2020. It is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And we were supposed to be celebrating.
Yeah, we were supposed to do that in August, except we had no podcasts in August. So I got to skip this whole controversy. So we're doing it now.
I mean, the country.
Yes.
And even though we've had the pandemic, so certainly, foreclosed on a lot of celebrations, I took part in an event at Harvard University to commemorate the 100th anniversary. And it was, I don't say it was like a funeral, but it was close.
You're right. Even it was, what was it, August 17 or something? Am I misremembering the date, which would be also bad of me, but it was muted. You're right. There wasn't a lot
muted, and it was an occasion to, for self-investigation and to review all of the crimes and misdemeanors of our feminist foremothers, because it has been decided by a number of journalists, primarily journalists who misread the scholarship, although some scholars are at fault. They have decided that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were hopeless racists and not to be commemorated. And if you look at articles in the New York Times and in the Smithsonian and everywhere, you learn that they said racist things and that they should not be remembered. They really want to cancel the foremothers.
Well, Brent Staples, he had an article in July.
Oh, he's relentless.
He's on the New York Times editorial board. So he called the subject actually a toxic legacy. And he wrote, stripped of her halo, Stanton, the campaign's principal philosopher, is exposed as a classic liberal racist who embraced fairness in the abstract while publicly enunciating bigoted views of African-American men, whom she characterized as Sambos and incipient rapists in the period just after the war.
Can I tell you how wrong that is?
Yeah, well, tell me.
And that is toxic journalism.
So there were. Actually, let me ask you, because there were two things, two sort of overall assertions. You could call them lies or wrong. One was that the suffragettes left out Black women and were racist. The second one, by 1913, there was a big parade through Washington, D.C., and they say Black women were basically sent to the end of the line. But talk about this break, because together during the Civil War and beforehand, Susan B. Anthony was very tight with Frederick Douglass. They were all in the abolitionist movement together. And then it started to fracture after the war was over.
Well, the first thing to know is that both Stanton and Anthony were lifelong abolitionists. They were fervent defenders of universal suffrage. And after the Civil War, they fully expected Congress would come forward with an amendment granting all Americans the right to vote. And to their shock, the 15th Amendment was limited to Black men. Women, Black and white, were just going to have to wait. Now, for them, this was, they were probably wrong to think that Congress was ready to give the vote to women, but they expected that. And they just viewed it as a shocking betrayal, particularly by abolitionist friends whom they'd stood by. Frederick Douglass and many others just betrayed and sort of abandoned the women's cause. And the women had deferred their cause. Now, did they make the right judgment? Did they say outrageous things? They did. It was a family quarrel among a group of progressives, and there were Black women who took the side of Stanton and Anthony. Sojourner Truth, some of the time she took both sides, but she was mainly on their side. Frederick Douglass forgave her. To this, if we visited, remember we visited Frederick Douglass' house,
actually
and
almost exactly
Elizabeth
a year
Cady
ago.
Stanton's portrait is there.
Right.
They were lifelong friends. He talked about when there were times, no white person wanted to be seen with him, and yet he had a place at Anthony's and at Stanton's house. Stanton would walk with him in the street, and these were not commonly done. And even Ta-Nehisi Coates has reviewed this case and said that his heart goes out to Stanton, and he forgives them. Frederick Douglass forgives them, but Brent Staples doesn't, because he doesn't know the history. And I'll say one more thing. It is true they used some scurrilous racial epithets. So did Frederick Douglass. He talked about Indians, Native Americans in disparaging ways, and said, they are not really capable of civilization. And he talked about them living in trees and so forth. And we properly think, well, okay, that's too bad that he did that, and then move on and honor him for being, one of the most profound, effective champions of liberty in American history. Well, the same was true of Stanton and Anthony. They were two of the lifelong fighters for women, for women's rights, and for abolition, but primarily for women's rights. And it's as if right now we're seeing textbooks, we're seeing scholars, and then ahead of them, journalists trying to take it all away.
Well, one of the things also when you take these things entirely out of the politics of the time.
Right.
So it wasn't just like white women against blacks. Once after the Civil Wars, my understanding is that it was much easier to give blacks, and let's be specific, black men. This wasn't about black women getting the vote. Right. Because it's like gerrymandering today, that the politicians felt that this would give them a lot of Republican voters right away, that you give the vote to black men right after the Civil War, they will vote Republican. Right. So there was a lot of that feeling. So whereas women could not be relied upon to vote Republican. And we forget how big prohibition was at that time. Exactly. And when women, that Stanton, they were more anti-Irish, honest to God, than they were anti-black. Like when you go back and you look at the problem of alcohol of that time and drunken husbands and public drunkenness, yes, and giving women the vote also meant embracing prohibition politics. Right. And a lot of people were not willing to do that. So when you look at her quotes where she used that Sambo line, she also said Patrick and Hans.
Well, she was an equal opportunity insulter.
Well, no, but it was about, they were like, why are you allowing these? I mean, the drunken Irish immigrant was as much a threat to and women she wouldn't of even the time.
Stanton, first of all, she had a bad temper.
Yeah.
She was always alienating friends, but she was a brilliant woman, and she had the idea. They had the first convention on women's rights in Seneca Falls in 1824. It was the first women's convention that I can find record of in the world, not only in the United States. And they wrote the Declaration of Sentiments that set out, sort of based on the Declaration of Independence, a declaration of the rights of American women. And this is all going to be taken away because in a moment of pique, when there was sort of a crisis among progressive humanitarians, she said some outrageous things, not specifically about black men, but about men, as you say, about all men, many men. And and the thing people leave out is there were, as I said before, there were black women who took her side. Mm-hmm. And there was worry that black men would not support women's suffrage.
Well, that's true, because there was one of the issues, again, was you were giving this vote to black men. And that was, if you want to be feminist about it, pretty patriarchal culture as well. So when Black families were given land as they were after the Civil War, this was also a way of sort of enforcing, the male head of the household of land ownership. So there were a lot of, I guess the point is,
a lot going on.
A lot of complicated struggles.
Look at it from two activists who spent their, entire lives together fighting for a cause and seeing it all come apart and being taken apart by their closest people they thought were their closest allies. And so they were heartbroken. They spoke out, and then they patched it up after that, and did regret it. And as I said, Frederick Douglass forgave them.
Well, they also had a lot of their money taken away. The women.
Well, that was part of it.
That was part of their anger, was to see all this money that had been promised suffrage then go.
Yes, a major philanthropist had left a fortune to the cause of suffrage and the cause of abolition. Well, after the war, the person that was controlling the money just said, well, I'm only going to use it now for reconstruction and for, making sure things go well with the 15th Amendment and then with other things. And they lost their money.
Right.
Without money, you have nothing.
Right.
And so they were.
And that was all too traditional for women's causes to have. So there was definitely peak. And as you say, they were definitely on the wrong side not to support the 15th Amendment. But when you look, if you're just going to look back on it cartoonishly, that the only reason they didn't support it was because of racism, that is completely and utterly wrong.
Completely wrong. It's not just simplistic. It's wrong. It was not the motive. So you have to understand people's motives. You have to put it in the context. And then, of course, you have to look at their entire lives. And every woman today, Black, white, every race, every ethnicity, owes a debt to these wonderful women warriors who started the women's movement in the United States and who deserve credit. Now what happens is people are going through and finding other women that did things. I know there were other women that did things, but they started it and they sustained it. They were viewed by everyone in the country as the leaders of the movement. And later on, the next generation of suffragists would call themselves, Susan's nieces. They called her Aunt Susan B. Anthony. This was known. I mean, it's just denying history to suggest that they weren't the leaders, but there are now actual efforts to say there's a woman who's written a book trying to show that Seneca Falls wasn't really important. It was just a little event.
Next thing they're going to start calling Susan Karen.
I know.
She was just a Karen. Before we bring Meredith on, I just wanted to give a quick background to the sculpture in the Central Park. That it was the result of a campaign by this nonprofit group called Monumental Women. And they were formed in the response to the overwhelming number of public works centered on white men. And as of 2011, just 8% of, wait for it, 5,193 public outdoor sculptures in the U.S. Depicted women. I wondered when I read that, do they include like angels or Lady Liberties or
fairies?
Fairies.
There are a lot of fairies and
Alice
in Wonderland.
Well, the joke about this, if it's a joke, is this is the first sculpture in Central Park that features real women. The other sculptures that are women or female are Alice in Wonderland, which, by the way, one of my all-time favorite sculptures. My kids played for hours on that sculpture. Juliet, and if we're going to count this as female, Mother Goose. That's it for Central Park women. So this is a huge deal that they were doing this. And Bergmann herself, she has done a lot of other important public sculptures, as she describes, works for social justice and historical redress. She did the opera singer Marian Anderson for a college in South Carolina. She did the Boston Women's Memorial and the Harlem Renaissance poet Countee Cullen that addresses identity and race. So she is really prominent in this world. And it must have been incredibly startling to her to suddenly be in the crosshairs of all these people who were going to object to her sculpture. So let's Let's bring her on and hear what she has to say. We could all use a little extra wine this holiday season. I know I sure can. But what if I told you that by drinking, you could help support meaningful causes and bring joy to others' lives? I'm serious. Just by drinking and enjoying a gorgeous glass of Californian wine or sparkling, you will be helping important missions around the world. That is, if you're drinking a glass from One Hope. One Hope is a Napa Valley winery built on hope and rooted in purpose. Every bottle of its award-winning wine supports a meaningful cause. One Hope's commitment to high-quality wine is as important as its commitment to the causes it supports. Through the sale of every bottle, One Hope has donated over $5 million to causes around the world, from building a school in Guatemala to funding over 3 million meals for children in need. One Hope is on a mission to nourish the future. One Hope believes that you shouldn't have to sacrifice your wallet either to enjoy quality award-winning wines. That's why its world-class vintner collection begins at $25, so everyone can afford to have the best of Napa Valley delivered to their homes. One Hope wines make fantastic gifts. I adore their special holiday bottles of shimmering, sparkling wine adorned in glitter and greetings of the season. And they make it all the more fun to pop one open on New Year's Eve and toast goodbye or good riddance to 2020. And if you purchase in bulk, you can get 5% off 4-packs, 10% off 6-packs, and 20% off 12-packs and earn rewards with every purchase. So stock up on wine for the holidays and visit onehopewine.com/femsplainers and use code FEMSPLAINERS for $10 off your first order. That's ONEHOPEWINE, onehope.com/femsplainers and use code FEMSPLAINERS for $10 off your first order today. Cheers. Meredith, welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well,
Lovely to meet you both.
Well, for those of you, most of you, of course, are listening, but we will post, as always, a clip on our YouTube channel. You have to go and look at Meredith is in her studio, and it is the most, maybe if Room Rater were here, you would go beyond a 10 out of 10 because you are
A+.
You are surrounded by sculptures, including what do you call it, the maquette of the Central Park sculpture, right?
Actually, a maquette is a little model, but this is the 1/3 height model. I made this monument maybe 5 times, beginning with a little maquette for the competition, and then you can't jump from that to 9 feet high. So you make an interim size model.
The ultimate sculpture is bronze and it's 14 feet high, correct?
Well, the monument is 14 feet. Yeah. The bronzes are 9 feet high.
Oh, okay.
Susan B. Anthony is 9 feet high. There's a 5 feet of granite pedestal lifting them up.
Well, can you take us through the process? Because from when you got this commission to its end, that as you say, it went through you. It wasn't just that you had to do the sculpture 5 times, because you didn't just do it over and over out of artists' desire for perfection. Tell us about
the politics.
The moment you got the commission and what happened. Take us through it.
Well, actually, I'll start a little earlier with the competition, for which there were 91 entries. And there was a pre-selection of finalists, and I was one of the 4 finalists. And there was a meeting then to which I brought I think it was a semi-finalist interview, to which I brought a little model. And the competition announcement specified that there should be statues of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and that the artist should find a way to honor as many as possible of the other women involved in the suffrage movement. And there was a list of 17 women, many of them less famous suffragists, many of them women of color, wonderful, wonderful people and fascinating lives in their own right. But it was this real challenge for the artist, because what the Parks Department and the Central Parks Conservancy wanted was a monument that would fit in with this historical collection that had been up for 100 plus years, included 23 statues of men and no historical women. And they didn't want an abstract work. They wanted these women physically represented in the park. And they didn't want something super contemporary because, again, it had to harmonize with this historical collection. There had been a moratorium for 70 years on new statues for Central Park. Nothing was allowed. And this actually wasn't written in law. It was just a habit of the Parks Department. But they did, the commissioner, Mitchell Silver, did lift it for this monument. So that was a very big deal. So I began trying to think how I would include all these other women and still keep the emphasis on Stanton and Anthony, because that was the assignment. And when you do a public art commission, you have to, in some way, satisfy the original group and their desires in order to win the commission. And then you go on to try to satisfy all the people who join in on the process. So I won the competition with a depiction of Stanton and Anthony at work. They were lifelong collaborators. They were totally complementary women, utterly different. They worked very well together. Stanton had a long, I think, somewhat unhappy marriage, but 7 children. She loved having babies. And Anthony never married. She had suitors when she was young, but did not marry. And so when Stanton was tied down in the nursery, Anthony was her emissary to the world. And Anthony would come to Stanton's house and they would write speeches together. So I showed them working, writing something. And that something became a scroll that burst the bounds of the traditional monument, which I thought was appropriate for these women, and rolled down off the pedestal forward to the fence behind which this monument was going to have to stand. And it bore a history of the suffrage movement, starting in 1848 with Stanton and the Declaration of Sentiments, which said all men and women are created equal, and ended in 1920 on a ballot box. So it was just a piece of the history of the suffrage movement, but it was a piece that included 20 other women by means of quotations. So there are the 2 statues, they're mute, they're expressive, and then there are the voices of 20 other women with their name and the date of the quotation. So it wasn't just a list of names, and it wasn't a chronology. It didn't have their birth and death dates. It had the date when they said what they said. And I researched for months to pick the most powerful quotations for this. And then later on, when my design won the competition, monumental women and their historians, friends, scholars got involved. So this is a months-long process of designing this scroll. Okay, and at the competition interview, which was 25 minutes, I spent 5 precious minutes reading out loud this scroll. And some people were in tears. It was really wonderful. So that was, I thought, a done deal, which I should have known from previous public art projects, some of which have taken 5 years. I'm just finishing one that has taken over 10 years, involved many, many stakeholders and parties and opinions and controversy. And that's basically what happened. First, we met with the Parks Department and the Central Park Conservancy, and they told us that the site that was specified in the original competition was, oh no, that's not the site. It's actually got to be absolutely symmetrical with the statue of Fitzgreen Halleck. It's got to move over and be stuck between a big old elm tree, very beautiful and very precious, and an imaginary tree that may someday be planted there. So the corner site that was so dramatic and open, and again, boundary breaking, suited for these women and this cause, was gone. So, okay, so now it's in a little kind of virtual niche, sort of, and facing front, not facing diagonally. So the design changed there. And I redesigned that scroll, I think, 9 or 10 times, moving the ballot box, moving it around, trying to make it as legible as possible. And at one point I realized that there could be parts where it rolled away from you that had no writing on them. They didn't need to, but that would allow me to continue the chronology with the parts you could easily see, because I really thought people would stand there and read this and come back over and over and be fascinated by these voices. So our next part of the approvals process was the Public Design Commission. These are a group of architects, landscape architects, museum representatives, artists appointed by the mayor, and they review all design projects, but this includes basketball courts and public toilets and statuary. So, and the artists were very passionate. The very first thing that was said at the very first meeting was by one of the artists who said, right off the bat, first comment, I'll paraphrase, something like, I'm really sorry to see that this is not a more contemporary work by an artist of color. So, and that, of course, I couldn't satisfy on either ground. It couldn't be a more contemporary work because the parameters of competition were not that. It could not be a big stainless steel triangle or the letter V or something. It had to be statuary. And I am who I am. There is a time when Jews were not considered white, particularly, although that is now, thank goodness, in the deeper past in American history. But we do know something about discrimination. So, and I have made a career of looking at all kinds of people who need more attention and episodes in history that need to be memorialized or honored. So I felt secure that I had the best of intentions and belonged there. However, a process that should have taken about 3 months took almost a year to win their approval. At one point, the Public Design Commission asked if we would remove the scroll, me and Monumental Women, and the ballot box, and and the inscriptions on the pedestals that referred to abolitionism, suffrage, and women's rights. Because all these suffragists began as abolitionists. They were speakers against slavery. That's how they were trained in public speaking. Women were supposed to be seen and not heard, or maybe not even seen in public. So they got their training in that cause. And it's really only after the Civil War that you have this terrible division of the suffrage movement and the terrible racism that emerged. Which was very much part of American society all along. Anyway, so they wanted simply statues of Stanton and Anthony with their names, Stanton and Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, that's it. No historical reference, no quotations, no reference.
Meredith, let me interrupt you there, because among the people who objected to the scroll, as you described the scroll, I'm just knocked out by it.
I know. It's such a
wonderful idea. And it engages you with the sculpture, because otherwise you go, a sculpture of 3 women, you look at it, then you might move on. Whereas what you had done had really engaged the viewer.
There's only 2 women then.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, even still, but it says among them, the people who objected to the scroll was Gloria Steinem.
Yes.
And they said that made the layout made it seem as Stanton and Anthony were, quote, standing on the names of these other women. So it wasn't a celebration or a recognition of what they had contributed. Here it was just seen by one activist that they were stepping on these other women.
Yes. Someone on the Public Design Commission said that the women were being abused by being put on the scroll.
Oh,
so
this is parody.
No, it was deadly serious, and it was not our intention. Monumental Women really wanted to find a way to have 2 statues and include an infinite number of women by implication, and a specific number of women in some way up to the artist. So in that sense, I think I failed to win the day with that design. I did win the competition. Anyway, so the idea was to have only Stanton and Anthony with only their names, just these statues. And that was voted unanimously by the Public Design Commission in favor of. It was approved. So Monumental Women and I, the group Monumental Women, which is all volunteer, very accomplished, interesting women from all fields, very diverse, very committed to the representation of women and people of minorities in public, ongoing, went away and decided we couldn't live with this. And the monument really needed to speak to the present moment and not just be an addition to the park's historical collection of statues. It had to somehow move history forward, as Pam Elam says. She's the president of Monumental Women. And I don't know how this was accomplished because I wasn't privy to these discussions, but somehow within New York City government, levers were pulled or people were buttonholed, and it was agreed that we were going to be allowed a third figure. Now, most of the monuments in the park are one man on one statue. Almost none of them are narrative. They don't show anything happening. I think Samuel Morse has his telegraph machine next to him. So there are attributes that explain who the figure is, but they're not really doing anything. So the idea of a third figure was very exciting to me. I could make a group in action. And of the African-American suffragists proposed, Sojourner Truth was the ideal one because she actually was a contemporary of these women. She's 20 years older than Susan B. Anthony, but they spoke at the same meetings. They corresponded, although Truth had people write for her because she could not read or write. And Sojourner Truth was a house guest of Elizabeth Cady Stanton in a house where Stanton kept a bedroom for Susan Anthony because she was there so often. So it's quite plausible that they did sit down at a table together. There are no photographs because there were no photographs. There was no casual photography at that time. People dressed up. No. There aren't any. Photography was still very relatively in its infancy. So people were very formal. People were formal anyway. Stanton called Anthony Susan, but Anthony called Stanton Mrs. Stanton all their lives, which amazes me. And of course, we don't know how they felt about race, really, in their hearts. But as abolitionists, they were in this group of, Stanton and Anthony were in this group of white people who wanted to end slavery, perhaps without any clear idea of what would become of these people who had been enslaved, to what extent they would be allowed into polite white society or educated or allowed to become citizens. There are degrees of this. William Lloyd Garrison.
Stanton had Frederick Douglass in her home. They were very close friends.
Anthony and Douglass were close. Anthony gave one of the eulogies at Douglass's funeral. Yes,
and rushed to his house and stayed there for over a week to take care of his wife after his death. I mean, this was a closely knit group, so they certainly weren't racist in the sense of not having an intimate friend. Stayed at their homes. They were connected to his family. I mean, to me, it seemed like an extended family that had a bad family quarrel. After the Civil War, and then Frederick Douglass forgave her. But anyway, go on.
So you grant they want a third figure. They want her to be Black, and you decide on Sojourner Truth. Makes sense.
Makes sense. Yes,
they work together. Yes?
I had a deadline, and many of my public commissions have had a rough deadline and then been delayed a year because funding fell through, which is always kind of a boon for me because I like to work more and more deeply if I can, so I can make use of extra time, but I had no extra time. This was to be unveiled exactly 2 years after the competition winner was announced. The process took over a year, ate into my sculpting time. So I was already working on the 9-foot high Susan B. Anthony and the 7-foot-high seated Elizabeth Cady Stanton while trying to win approval. And I had to alter those gigantic figures in order to fit 3 figures together. So the composition that you see incorporates the previous design. But if you're a sculptor and you can see these differences, you will see 25 little things I did, or not so little things. Some of the arms were cut in 4 places to just change a gesture from this to that, something, or move an arm up, or make someone lean a little over. All these things to subtly make the 3 people together in conversation, and not so subtly. Stanton was looking at Anthony, and then we cut her at the neck, and her head moved to and many alterations. Also, Sojourner Truth was nearly 6 feet tall, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton was closer to 5 feet tall. So to have them in any other relation except seated would have made a very odd, challenging, interesting problem for a sculptor, but one that I thought I had already worked out, with Anthony in the center bending over, reaching for Stanton, and Stanton looking past her. And so Sojourner Truth is seated. She's still taller than Stanton, but they fit, and they are involved in this conversation. So very, very quickly, I modeled the 1/3 height Sojourner Truth, and then had that digitally enlarged, where a guy came to the studio, scanned this model, went away. It was fed through computers, milled in very high density foam, almost like balsa wood, very heavy, and delivered in sections to the studio, which was quite a trick because it has standard sized doors, and then put together and covered with clay. And then that layer of clay was worked. And I finished the 3 statues at Thanksgiving 2019, leaving 4 to 6 months for bronze casting, which means 6 months, and a month to 6 weeks for mold making, which is absolutely necessary. So I didn't even have 2 years to sculpt these sculptures.
And then, so you get Sojourner Truth into this.
Oh, yes.
And then everybody's happy.
And then everybody's happy, right? They say, great job, Meredith.
No.
No, that didn't happen?
No. There is a lot of confusion about monuments and how truthful they're supposed to be, or how allegorical they're supposed to be, or how symbolic, or how narrative. And I really wanted these figures to represent the story of the suffrage movement symbolically. So one of them is speaking, one of them is organizing. She has her traveling bag stuffed with, bursting with papers. One of them is writing. And these are the aspects of activism that go into a successful movement. So because I was showing a moment that I had, as an artist, invented, these 3 women actually physically together, the Public Design Commission wanted me to consult 3 historians who were experts on Sojourner Truth to get their approval for this depiction. So I went to Nell Irvin Painter, who wrote The History of White People, Old in Art School, and other wonderful, wonderful books. I went to Margaret Washington, who has written a more recent biography of Sojourner Truth than Nell Painter's, and to Darcy Grimaldo Grigsby, who is an art historian, I think at Stanford, who wrote a marvelous book about Sojourner Truth and photography called Enduring Truths, where she goes through every image, the extant image of Sojourner Truth, who was amazing, was one of the first people to copyright her own image and promulgate it, sell her image to support herself. Really an amazing person. And most people don't know much about her earlier life, but I read all those biographies and they are fascinating and I recommend them. Anyway, I had to correspond with these women, show them images, and get their approval. And actually, I asked them for suggestions. And I got marvelous suggestions. Darcy's graduate students went into a whole thing about Sojourner Truth's knitting, which appears in her photographs, which she displays and what it meant and why and how it would provide a nice graphic element. And so I was happy to include the knitting. And the issue of
her collars, and she was so conscious of presenting herself in a specific way. Yes.
Yes.
I thought you did that so beautifully.
Thank you. But also in actual sculptural design, whose hands were on the table. And initially I had Stanton poised to write. She's holding her pen up and she's about to write, and her other hand is holding her piece of paper on the table. So for Sojourner Truth, I had one hand gesturing and the opposite hand flat. And I think it was Margaret Washington who said, no, she was illiterate. She really used her hands in her speaking. So they both have to be activated. So now they are both activated. And actually it works very well. But that interior space among the three women is activated by Anthony holding out a document and Stanton with her pen and Sojourner Truth's hand. And it's a marvelous abstract sculpture in among, in the air. The negative space is an abstract sculpture. Anyway, I got wonderful, wonderful input from them. And I was able to go to the Public Design Commission and say, we've got to have the knitting. It was not a hobby. It's not a piece of domesticity. It doesn't make her look less powerful. It actually means blah, 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 because so-and-so said so. And I was able to get authority for these artistic decisions. And that was very encouraging. So once I had satisfied them, they did give approval with the 2 abstentions.
Here's another great gift idea from one of our sponsors, especially for those who suffer from muscle pain and muscle tension. And don't we all? Theragun is a handheld percussive therapy device that releases your deepest muscle tension using a scientifically calibrated combination of depth, speed, and power. And it's as quiet as an electric toothbrush. That's because the all-new Gen 4 Theragun has a proprietary brushless motor that's so quiet you will wonder if it's on, while you soothe your aching muscles with Theragun's signature power, amplitude, and effectiveness. What I love about my Theragun Gen 4 is that it's like having a masseuse in your own home, whether it's a small kink in my shoulder or stiffness in my lower back after a tough workout. The Theragun Gen 4 always brings me relief. And what makes it an especially great gift is that the recipient can try it for 30 days. But we know once you see it, you'll want one for yourself as well. So try Theragun for 30 days. There's no substitute for the Theragun Gen 4 with an OLED screen, personalized Theragun app, and the quiet and power you and your muscles need. Starting at only $199, go to Theragun.com/femsplain right now and get your Gen 4 Theragun today. That's Theragun, Theragun.com/femsplain. Theragun.com/femsplain, and you'll get to try it for 30 days and feel better. So you complete the statue. That was the last objection?
No, actually, then there was a group of younger scholars, not connected to these older scholars, based, I think, out of Rutgers, who wrote a long letter objecting to this depiction. And at one of the community board meetings, one of the members of the community board felt that they should have a hearing or that the whole thing should be delayed. And miss our wonderful date of August 26, 2020, the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, because she felt that these people should be able to have input. But she was outvoted.
What was their primary objection? They were just kvetching, I'm imagining, but.
It's so complex. I don't think there is a primary objection. Basically, the accusation is of whitewashing history because white people wouldn't have sat down with Black people, which wasn't true, or Black people would not have agreed to sit with these horrible racist white people. I'm not really clear on the objection.
That's just historically inaccurate.
Well, they quote pieces of what was said. And that's always a crime. And I do so much research. And because sculpture projects take so long, and I have to keep myself involved and excited and interested and challenged, I continue to read. So every time a new biography is published and I'm working on it, I read it. So I knew a lot more, I felt, me with my BFA than these professors who were saying that this was unfair and would send the wrong message. I thought it sent a very positive message, which is that women can sit down together and change the world.
Yeah.
And should.
And did.
So and did, yes. But more that it's an image for the future.
Yes.
And I remember years ago, I have applied for so many of these commissions that I have lost. And one was for a civil rights memorial for the University of Mississippi. And I read a great deal of what James Meredith wrote and many Southern authors. I reread a lot of Faulkner. And anyway, James Meredith said that what he felt he was doing was creating images for 40 years in the future. And I thought that was wonderful, that just the image of him walking into that university was something that would nourish and inspire for decades. So that was my ambition.
So it did finally, despite all the objections, get done on time. It was there for the unveiling in August.
Yes.
And almost as quickly as it was unveiled, people were asking for it to be covered up or removed. Is that fair?
I have not heard, no, I haven't heard that much. Almost as quickly as it was involved, people were weeping and taking selfies. A friend of mine was there when an older Black woman came and she overheard her talking to the monument and saying something like, well, sister, they finally got you on a pedestal, and then taking a selfie. And my friend burst into tears, my white friend. And immediately it was turned into a memorial for Ruth Bader Ginsburg with a banner and flowers. People kept leaving flowers. Then right before the election, it was decorated with pink panties that said, grab them by the ballots and things like that. So there's been a great deal of positive reaction. I've done something like 15 webinars talking to various groups about it, children, historians, library groups. I haven't heard as much.
I hope
negative.
It's safe. I hope it in this, passion for tearing down statues, I hope it had some guards around it occasionally when people are out.
Well, all of Central Park is very well patrolled.
Yes.
So you haven't felt any pressure that statue has had to go?
I have not. I think that the statue represents the good that the women did and what we all derive so much freedom from. When they were fighting this battle, women could not own themselves. And that's why they were abolitionists. That's why they felt a kinship with the enslaved. Women could not open bank accounts. Women could not inherit money unless their fathers specifically allowed them to. Women were the property of their fathers until they became the property of their husbands. If their husband was a drunk, and that's why there were all these temperance societies, he could take the woman's wages and go to the town. The family decided to leave him. He automatically got custody of the children, even if he was insane. He could have her committed, but women had very little recourse to the law. And that's the first thing that Stanton and Anthony fought for was widows' rights in New York State and the first legislation that they got passed. Long before they were fighting for the vote. I mean, Stanton, the radical, always wanted the vote, but she wanted a lot of other things that people thought were way over the top. But just the number of rights we take for granted and do not realize how recent they are and how fragile they are. So that's what I want to make a monument to honor. I do not like the white supremacy that was really pervasive in that era. Emerson, if you read Nell Painter's book or you read Jill Lepore's book, These Truths, you see how white supremacy has been part of this country's history from the beginning. And that included immigrant groups like Italians or Greeks or Jews. They were not considered white and only gradually absorbed into whiteness. So their attitudes are horrible, but I don't believe they would have those attitudes now. Those attitudes are part of the true history of that time. And yet they befriended and worked with Frederick Douglass and admired him and respected him. And they admired and respected Sojourner Truth while looking down at her, perhaps, and while being willing to say, after the Civil War, when these suffrage groups had put aside all their work for women's rights and only worked to help the Union win the war, they were sure they would get the vote. And they did not. And that's when they got very angry, very bitter, and said those terribly racist things in public. So again, it's a piece of history. It's not what we have now. It's not what we want now. It's not supposed to represent that. But the monument is there to honor them and thank them for the good they did, which I believe it outweighs the racism.
And I mentioned to Danielle earlier that Frederick Douglass himself said some very disparaging things about Native Americans and referred to them as living in trees and not, they, unlike the blacks, he said that the Native Americans weren't ready for civilization, and he had all sorts of reasons why they should not be included. And that's, a small demerit on his record, but it has to be put in the context of the greatness of his life and the sum total of his struggle for freedom for so many. And I would say the same, obviously, for Stanton and Anthony, but I almost find it a kind of sexism that that the suffrage movement and its heroines are held to some special standard, and no one seems to come out looking good. Everyone has to be defined by their very worst moment. We don't do that to men. We make statues, we honor, and don't reduce them to their worst moments. If you did that, there could be a statue to no one.
Well, that's what Obama said, right? He said, the world is messy. There are ambiguities. People who do really good stuff have flaws. Let me ask you one more question, Meredith. I mean, as an artist, having to go through these sort of public commissions, just with the usual problems, let alone the politics that surrounded this particular one, are you satisfied in the end what came out, that you did have to compromise some of your ideas, like the scrolls? How do you feel about that, just as an artist and going through that?
I actually love this design more than the original one. And I felt that I grew artistically through this process by having to design a group, which I had never done. My Boston Women's Memorial is 3 women, but they had never met in real life. And I showed them at a distance from each other so that you can kind of assemble the conversation yourself. And it was really thrilling to create these large figures interacting and to show some of the largeness of their lives in that way, interlocked and interrelated. So I'm really happy with the design. I think it will stand the test of time. I hope that this mood of fury passes and that people can calm down.
I can't wait to see it. And just seeing it behind you and the photos I've seen, it's lyrical. It's the 3 graces. It
does look beautiful.
Absolutely magnificent work of art, apart from the historical resonance, which would make me cry too if I were there. So, bravo. And against all odds, you've created just this masterpiece.
Well,
thank you. Thank you so much, Meredith, for joining. And yes, I can't wait to get to New York to now go see this in person.
Oh, I have to ask her one last question.
Yeah, sure.
The Mary Wollstonecraft statue.
Oh,
yes.
You seen it?
That's mean, Christina. That's mean.
No, she may have. I mean, I honestly think I should withhold judgment till I see it. People are saying that when you're actually there with it, it's quite exciting. So but photos.
I've seen a dozen photographs, and I will withhold judgment until I actually see it, because they don't show it well enough to know what the heck it is or what's going on there.
I don't know. I think your statue could have been improved by having like a geyser of what, aluminum or something under
and
silver.
a little homunculus coming out of her head. No,
and they could have been naked. I think they could have been naked.
Well, at one point there were going to be little bronze pigeons on their heads.
All right. Well, thank you, Meredith, for joining us. This has been so interesting.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Take care.
bye-bye.
Well, that was so interesting. What I was very heartened, like, don't always believe what you read or see in the press, that this monument is now being embraced by women and women activists, and that it became a sort of central gathering point for mourners of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So that is like a relief that maybe these monuments, they get through whatever controversy of the moment. And if they get made, well, it's kind of hard to take them down, isn't it?
Yeah. And that happens with a lot of these works of art. And remember the Vietnam?
That was so controversial.
Controversy, and people were so angry. And now it is iconic and so moving. I mean,
well, people were
the way people interact with it,
right?
And now the way people are interacting with this monument, it's very touching. And
well, you could make the argument too that in some ways, doing any realistic or traditional sculpture is problematic today because of all the politics and representation.
Well, almost nothing will survive today's politics. And it's a miracle she got it through, given the bitterness and the irrationality and the historical illiteracy. These young historians who came to protest didn't know what they were talking about.
Right.
On the other hand, they were given a forum and they were heard, but in the end, wiser,
God, I don't want to hear what they have to say when they weigh in on the public toilets.
Oh, God, I know.
This is a male urinal and discriminates against female users or women who might not have penises.
Or
there's always
no, what are women called now? Menstruators?
No, we still haven't. I don't think they've worked out a term.
They don't have a term.
Yeah, and the bathrooms, the public toilets. Why should there be men and women? I mean, it's endless. But I think that's the power of something like the Vietnam War Memorial. Even it was controversial because it was so arrestingly new. This idea of this kind of black gash in the earth, that when you go and see it and you sort of descend and then rise. And
many of the Vietnam veterans themselves felt heartbroken and betrayed until they went there,
until they saw it.
And then, every time I go there, I cry. The way people interact and find the names,
and
you can make a stencil,
right?
They put flowers in and go through the entire war.
But it's the Korean War Memorial is figurative and it's pretty stilted and
yeah, it's a little
doesn't have the same magic. But anyway, well that is heartening. So Christina, it's been so lovely to have you back. I hope you'll occasionally agree to join us.
I'm just so happy. Kind of I don't know. I had a certain birthday that will go unmentioned.
70.
You had Barbara Emile on the show recently. It was a great interview. And I remember I met her once with you. We were
in Canada.
And she looked fabulous. But she said, we asked her how she was. And she says, well, I'm just approaching a very distressing birthday. It's a very scary birthday. And she was turning
60?
70. And I was so much younger. I was 60 and thought, 70, yeah. So I've just, sort of liberated myself.
Yeah, that's good. You're mellowing.
I'm mellowing.
The podcast
I'm now having
head.
I just wrote a paper that's coming out in Persuasion.
Oh, Persuasion. We're big Persuasion fans here.
About Shirley Chisholm, a woman I greatly admire. I remember I reviewed Mrs. America.
Yes.
And there was a little segment about Shirley Chisholm, and I had loved her when I was, in the 60s.
Izzy picked up my notes that I threw on the floor. I got them, Izzy. I'm done with these notes. Sorry. She's chewing my finger. Go on.
It led me to go back and read more about her. And because I didn't really quite, the way they depicted her in the movie was a little generic and just without showing her in precision, with any precision. And so I just wrote a piece about her visit to Governor Wallace. She visited him in the hospital when he was sick. And it was quite a momentous occasion because he was this arch segregationist and she was this progressive feminist, fighter for civil rights. And it changed him. Oh, now Izzy's not.
Izzy's saying it's over. I love how she did this when you came over the other night. And when it's time for her to go to bed or she's decided it's time to go, she just comes at you and just starts like,
yes,
it's time.
She does that at home.
But where can you go if you're already at home? What does she want?
She wants to go to bed. And then what happens, because she does sleep in my bed upstairs, what happens is she just gets fed up and then puts herself to bed.
Izzy. All right. Well, it's been wonderful to have you and Izzy. Maybe, and those of you who are contributors to the program through Patreon will have got some questions for Christina, which she's graciously going to stay and answer, even though she doesn't have wine.
They've never seen me
and
2 hours without 2 glasses of wine.
I know this really huge water bottle. I'm a little disturbed. It's an elegant one, but I'm a little concerned. But anyway, so we're going to have that conversation for the monthly last call, and then maybe we've gotten you out in a couple of our Zoom cocktail parties for subscribers. So if you join up, you get that too. So anyway, thank you for joining, and we'll see you all next week, next episode for the last one of the season, our holiday episode. So goodbye.
Bye-bye.
The Femsplainers is a weekly podcast carried on the Ricochet Network and available pretty much on every podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and watch video of our interviews on YouTube. You'll find links to everything, plus how to contact us directly at femsplainers.com. We survive and depend on your support. Like the show? Consider donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/femsplainers and get our exclusive monthly bonus episode, Last Call, in which you get to join the conversation with our guests. And there's much more. And a big shout out of thanks to our audio and video editor, Nat Frum.